Welcome to this YouTube channel. In the last Pandas documentation series video, we looked at what kind of data Pandas can handle for us. Today, the question we want to ask is, how do I read and write tabular data using Pandas? And in order to do this, we'll use the dataset from the Pandas doc. I'll leave a link to this dataset in the description of this video. But it's Titanic data. And in case you're wondering what Titanic is, you can Google Titanic to see what the event is. And just a Google search shows this. It was a British ocean liner that sank on April 15 April 1912. And so many people died. The actual figure is given here as 1,496 people who died. And so they collected the data of those people, and the data is given, the description of the data is this: the passenger ID, those who survived. And let me show you what the data set actually looks like. And this is what the data set looks like, where you have this. By the way, this type of data is what is known as CSV. And as you can see here, this is .csv. And what does CSV stand for? It's comma separated values. And as you would see here, you have this heading here, which is the passenger ID, and this is separated with a comma, and we have survived, comma, plate class, comma, and the actual values after this heading. And passenger ID 1, survived 0, and so on and so forth. But essentially, this is a CSV file, and when you hear CSV, it's comma separated values. And here's a description of the data. And so the data consists of the following columns. We have the passenger ID, the ID of every passenger, survived, whether the passenger survived or not. 0 for yes, they did survive, and 1 for no, they didn't. P class, that's one of the 3 ticket classes. We have the name of the passenger, the gender of the passenger, the age of the passenger, the number of siblings or spouses that the passenger has aboard, the number of parents or children aboard, the ticket number of the passenger, the fare of the passenger, the cabin number of the passenger, and the portion of embarkation, which is named embarked in this data. So if you have a data set like this, what do you do? How do you read this kind of data in Pandas? So I'll head over to Google Colab. And if you recall, it's colab.research.google.com. And once you open that, it should show files that you've recently worked with. I'm going to create a new notebook. Once I create that new notebook, I'll head over to Files here. I'll click on that. I'll wait for this to load. Now, after this has loaded, I'll click on this button here, which helps me to mount drive. Now, of course, just as it is for VS Code or for Jupyter Notebook, we have to store our file somewhere. And so here we have to mount the drive. Mounting the drive enables us to connect to Google Drive. And that's where we'll store the file. That's the data set. And that's where we also store our Jupyter Notebook as well. And so here in the drive, as you can see, once it's mounted, you see this drive. And by the way, if you haven't, because I already have my Google account open, if I don't, it's going to ask me to authorize this Colab to have access to my Google Work Drive space. So I click this, I drop down. I already created this folder, which I named Pandas documentation. Now in Pandas documentation, I already created a folder which I called data. And here I already downloaded the data set. But if you want to know how to download the data set, I would say just come to the link here. If you click on the link, once you click on the link I attached in the description, it will take you here. Once you are here, you can do Command S on Mac or Control S on Windows. Now download that file to anywhere. It could be to your downloads. It could be, just make sure you know where you downloaded it to. And once you've downloaded that file, you head over to Colab and look for that data. And in case you also want to know how I created this folder, it's just by, so for instance, if I have my drive here, say I want to create a folder, I'll just click this button here, the 3 dots, and I will say new folder. I will call this test folder. I'm not going to use it, but just to show you how to create this folder. Now, once I'm done with this, how do you import data? And again, if you notice the structure, I have Pandas documentation and then I have data. So here inside test folder, we can also create another folder and call that data. And I'm just doing this just so you know how I imported the data set here. And here on the 3 dots again, I'll click on upload. If I click on upload, it will ask me to select where I downloaded the data set. And here it is, titanic.csv. I'll click on that titanic.csv and click on open. And once I do that, it says ensure your files are saved elsewhere. This runtimes file will be deleted. No problem. Okay. Okay, so once I do that, you can see the folder here, right? So that's essentially how I did this. I'm going to delete this now. This was just to show you what I did and how I did it. Okay, so let's continue. So what do we want to do now? We want to read this data in. And the way we do that here in Colab is, of course, this is general to everything. We have to import pandas, right? If you've not forgotten, we import pandas as PD. I run that cell using Shift and return or Shift enter. The next thing is to read the data in here. So I'll create a data frame, which I would name Titanic, and I'll use pd.read_CSV. Now, the reason we used read_CSV is because we're reading a CSV file. And just so you know, there are different formats that are available for you to read in Pandas. So you can read CSV, you can read Excel, you can read SQL, you can read JSON, you can read Parquet. But one thing is common to all of these file types. So if you want to read Excel, for instance, you do read Excel. If you want to read JSON, you do read JSON. If you want to, and if I even do this, you can see all these things that are available for us. You can read SPSS, you can read Starter, you can read Table, you can read SAS. So there are things you can read. Parquet is there, HTML, HDF, and these are all formats that you can read. So, but in our case, what we want to read is the CSV file, because that's the file format that we have there. How do we access this Titanic? Now, the way to do that here in Colab is click on these 3 dots again and say copy path. When you copy path, just paste that path here. And once you do that, you can use the Shift return again and that runs this particular cell. Let's view what is in that data frame now. I'll just type out here Titanic, and once I do that, I'll see the data. And let me just zoom out a bit so that you can see the entire screen, and let me shrink this a bit. Okay. So as you can see, we have this Titanic, and by default, when you read in this data and you print it out this way, the output you see here returns the first 5 rows and the last 5 rows for you. But say you want to see the first 8 rows. So let's say I want to see the first 8 rows. The first 8 rows of a Pandas data frame. How do we go about that using this Titanic example? Now, there's a method called head. And what head does is that it enables you to view the first, it has an argument. So if I do Titanic.head, and then I pass in this argument 8. So 8 is the number of rows I want to read. I'm going to zoom in again so that you can see this clearly. Or in fact, let me just exit this so that we can see this very clearly. All right, so I want to see the first 8 rows of a Pandas data frame. What I need to do is Titanic.head 8. And as you can see, I passed in 8 here as an argument. If what we want to see is the first 10, then you pass in 10 here. So I'm going to run this, and as you can see, we have the first 8 rows. If you count this, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now you notice that we have a particular numbering here. These numbers here are what is referred to as index, and we'll come to that later on. Now, let's say that we are interested in not the first 8 rows, but let's say we are interested in the last 10 rows. And it's always good to do this so that you can understand what your data looks like. You have a broader view of what your data looks like from the top and from the bottom. So here we can say, okay, we want the last 10 rows. And so let's say we are interested in the last 10 rows. How do we do this? Again, we call that Titanic using this method called tail. So think of it, head, tail, head, tail. So for tail, we pass in this 10 as argument because we want to view the last 10 rows. If I use shift and return or shift and enter to run that cell, we have this. And as you can see, if you count this, we have 10. Now, by default, if you don't include anything here, it's going to print the last 5 rows. As you can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you don't include anything here, it prints out the last 5 rows. Okay, I hope that is clear. For each of the columns, they have their particular data type. As you would see from here, this feels like everything here is a number. Everything here, they are all numbers. These are numbers, but these are texts. These are texts, and this has a 0.0, which would probably indicate that this should be a floating point type. If you've been following along with the Python documentation series, this shouldn't be new to you. Talking about the float, the int, and then the string. So how do we know these data types that each of these columns represent? The way to do that, again, is, so let's say we want to know the column data types. How do we do that? Again, we call Titanic. We say .dtypes. If you run that, you see passenger ID is an integer, survived is an integer, P class is an integer, name is an object, sex is an object, age is float, just as I earlier mentioned. But then you might be wondering, yes, we've treated integer, we've looked at float, but what's this object? So here, it turns out that strings are actually referred here. So in this case, name is actually a string, but in this case, it's referred to as an object. I hope that is clear to you. All right. So when asking for dtypes, I don't know if you noticed, but we did not have parentheses here. It's not this way. But if you look at the tail and the head methods, we had this parenthesis. And the reason for that is because dtypes is an attribute of data frame and series. And attributes do not need parentheses. Attributes do not need brackets. Attributes represent characteristics of a data frame or series. Methods, which require brackets, they do something. And so they do something with the data frame, just as we've seen here. So let me explain this in a layman term. So you think of a human being. These are object-oriented terminologies. So think of a human being, right? We as humans, we have our skin color, we have our height, we have our weight. Those are our attributes. Those are our characteristics. Those are things that they know us by, right? You can say, oh, this person is fair in complexion. This person is tall. This person is so and so. This is the weight of this person. We're not doing anything. But then we can also say that this person can run. This person can talk. This person can walk. This person can eat. So all of those things are methods because they are things that this human can do. So you think of this data frame as an object. And so this dtypes, for instance, is just a characteristic of that data frame. And so it's not doing anything. But tail, we want to do something. We want to get, something. All right. I hope that clarifies it well enough. So let's look at this scenario. Now, I've been learning Pandas, and pardon me, I forgot to rename this file. So let's quickly rename our file, which is always good to do. I'm gonna call these. How do I read and write tabular data? Okay, so that next time I come there, I can always know what is in there. So let's have this scenario. My colleague has requested that. So let's say my colleague requested the Titanic data set as a spreadsheet. And you all, I believe you know what spreadsheets are. In case you don't know, think of Microsoft Excel. So they want to have this file. It was in CSV, right? And we could read it in Pandas. We've seen what's in there, right? But they don't know how to use Pandas. All they know how to use applications like Microsoft Office Excel. So how do we give them this data, which is in CSV? How do we take that and put that into Excel? And the way we do that is, so before I even talk about how to do this, or let me just write the code here. So Titanic.toExcel, we pass in the name of the file, which is in this case. Now, I'm going to do this. I will copy this whole thing because I want it to be saved in the same directory. the only thing I'm going to do now is to call this Titanic.xlsx. Right. Now, the other thing I can pass in here is the sheet name. And if you've worked with Excel, you know that if you have a workbook, you can have multiple worksheets in a workbook. And the way to differentiate those worksheets is by having different names for them, right? And so it's best practice. It's a very good practice to always name your sheet, especially when you're working this way, using Pandas to Excel. And I'll say index equal to false. And if you still recall, when I read this the other time, I told you about this particular numbering here that you see here. These are the indices, right? But we don't want that when we are transferring these files to Excel. Now, whereas the read underscore whatever, so read underscore CSV, read underscore XLSX, Excel, read underscore JSON, all of these functions are used to read data to Pandas. The to underscore anything, it could be dot to CSV. You could also convert from one CSV to another CSV. I mean, it's not like conversion actually. It's more like you're storing that data. So it's like, just to say it in layman terms, you're taking what's in Titanic and you're storing it in an Excel format. That's just the way to read this. So you're taking what's inside Titanic, which is a data frame, and you're storing that in an Excel format. You can do this for different file types. You can say dot to CSV, you can say dot to Parquet. I mean, you can, any file you want to save it into, you can see you have .html. But again, in this case, what our colleague understands is spreadsheet, right? So here, you can see that we've renamed the sheet as passengers. If we don't include this, by default, the sheet name is going to be sheet 1. Let me have it here. Sheet 1 is the default sheet name, if not passed in as an argument. I hope I spelled my argument correctly. All right, so this is what happens. And so if we do this, if I run this line, this cell, if I run this cell, what do I have? Now let's head over to File. If I go to my drive, I will go to Collab. I will here. If I head over to this place, as you can see, we have Titanic.slsx. Now I'm going to delete that file so that you can see it real time. I will delete this file. As you can see, we don't have it here, right? And I'm going to rerun this line of code so that you can see what's happening here. I'm going to rerun that line of code. And if I reload this using this button here, which is refresh, I should see Titanic.slsx. I hope this is clear. And so let's say, okay, now our colleague has worked on this file and we want to then reload this file. So now our colleague said, okay, I'm done with it. I've seen what you have there. I've made some modifications. And we're just assuming that the colleague made a modification. There's no colleague here really, but then you get the point. How do we then read this data in again? So again, how did we do it before? I'll call this still the same thing, Titanic. It doesn't mean we have to call this Titanic. In fact, in most cases, you probably see df just to say that this is a data frame. But again, it's good to name variables in such a way that is descriptive. And since we're dealing with Titanic, you'd want to have Titanic. Perhaps you might want to say, okay, maybe this is Titanic Excel, just so you know that this is the Excel version of the Titanic, right? But again, it doesn't matter whatever variable name you use there, but just ensure that you are consistent with your naming. So I call this Titanic Excel, and in fact, let me just call this Titanic. Let me call this Titanic. I'm going to do pd.read_Excel. I will pass in, since I have this file name here, I'll pass that in. Oh, I realized I think I wrote that in read_Excel. I'll pass that in here. And I'll say that the name of a sheet I want to read in here. And this is good when you have multiple sheets in this in this spreadsheet. So if you have multiple sheets, it just reads this particular sheet, which is the passengers. And let's say that our colleague has returned a modified Excel sheet to us, and we want to work with that. Okay. So let's read this and let's see what we have. When I read this, I ran that just now, and let's view the first 5 rows. How do we do that? Do you still remember? Titanic.head. If you run that, you have the first 5 rows. And as you can see, we have the same kind of data. But let's say we are interested in a technical summary of this data. We are interested in a technical summary of a data frame. Of course, using this Titanic as an example. The way I'll do that is titanic.info. If I run titanic.info, I will see this information. And the method info provides technical information about a data frame. And let's explain what the output is in more detail. As you can see, this is indeed a data frame, right? And this enables us to know that this is a data frame. There are 891 entries. In other words, there are 891 rows in this data set. And each row has a row label, also known as the index, which is what you see here. The 0, 1, I talked about this. These are just row labels. And these values range from 0 to 890, as you see here. Now, the table also has 12 columns. And as you can see here, it tells you the total number of columns you have here, 12 columns. And most of the columns have value for each of the rows. All 891 are non-null. But some columns do have missing values and are less than 891 non-null values. An example of that is this here. The age is not up to 891, and so we have some missing values in there. Cabin isn't up to 891, and so we have some missing values. The same thing as embarked. We have some missing values there as well. The columns, name, sex, cabin, embarked, as you can see, all of these, they consist of textual data, which we also know as strings, which of course in this case is referred to as object. And so we have these, these, all of those are objects. Now the other columns are numerical data, with some of them are whole numbers and some of them are real numbers. And so if you look at this, these are whole numbers, these are real numbers, which is the floating type. Now the kind of data, which is, it could be characters or integers, in the different columns are summarized by listing the dtypes. So if you want to know the type of data, you can check the dtype, which I believe we did earlier here. Right. Now the approximate amount of RAM used to hold the data frame is also provided. And so you can see the memory usage here. This is about 83.7 plus kilobyte. And so that's it for this particular video. And just a recap, remember, getting data into Pandas from many different file formats or data sources is supported by using the read underscore anything function. So if you want to read, not that, if you have read underscore anything else, it could be CSV, it could be Excel, it could be Parquet, it could be HTML. We've looked at that. Exporting data out of Pandas is provided by different two methods. And so you think of this like you're getting data into Pandas, You use the read underscore anything. But if you want to export data out of Pandas, what do you use? You use to underscore anything else. So to CSV, to Excel, and so on and so forth. The head, tail, info, methods, and the dtypes are convenient for a first check. So I encourage you that whenever you get your data, a few things that you would want to do is to first understand what the data is like. The description of the data set, if you have it, which you should in any case, because that's how the data makes sense to you. But apart from that, you want to see the head, you want to use the tail method just to get the first, whatever rows, first n rows and the last n rows, the info method that allows you to see the technical summary of that data frame, just as we have here, and definitely the dtypes attribute as well. So that's it in this video. I'll see you in the next one where we talk about how to select a subset of a data frame. Thank you and have a great day. Bye.